As the days passed, I found myself standing at the edge of a new chapter in my life. The decision to leave the Mountain Pine Lodge behind wasn't easy, especially with the weight of family expectations hanging over me. But as I reflected on everything I had sacrificed, all the hours I spent pouring my heart into a business that never truly recognized me, I knew deep down it was the only choice left for me. It was time to take control of my own future. I moved away from Colorado, though the memories of the hotel still haunted me. It wasn't just a place. It was the idea of what I thought I could make it, what I believed I could build with my own hands. I had taken a family legacy and tried to breathe new life into it, only to watch it slip away from me, as if my efforts were meaningless. But now, as I settled into my new life, I began to realize that perhaps it wasn't about the hotel at all. Perhaps it was never meant to be. With the support of a few close friends, I started to rebuild my life from scratch. I poured myself into new projects, new business ventures, things I could control, things that weren't defined by anyone else's expectations. It was hard at first. There were days when I felt the loneliness of being alone in a new city, without the comfort of the family connections that once anchored me. But as time went on, I started to discover a strength within myself I hadn't known existed. I began taking on new challenges, consulting for small businesses and working with startups. My expertise in revitalizing companies became my new identity. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always glamorous, but it felt real. It felt like something I could call my own. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my career, this time on my terms. But there were moments when the shadows of the Mountain Pine Lodge would creep back in. I'd find myself wondering if things could have turned out differently, if my family had just seen me for who I really was, someone who was capable of so much more than just being the dutiful daughter. And then, there were days when I'd hear about the hotel's struggles again, Ryan's mismanagement, the decline in guest satisfaction, and the negative reviews that began to pile up. It was hard not to feel a small sense of satisfaction, knowing I had been the one who truly understood the business, while Ryan was floundering. The truth, however, was that my bitterness began to fade with time. The resentment I once held for my family started to dissolve as I found new purpose in my own work. Yes, the betrayal had stung deeply, but it also gave me the freedom to chart my own path. I no longer needed to prove myself to anyone, least of all to Ryan or my parents. I had learned a hard lesson about self-worth, that it can't be defined by someone else's expectations or by their failures to recognize your potential. Years later, I found myself in a much different place. I had my own business, a small but successful consultancy that focused on helping struggling companies find their feet again. It was a far cry from the Mountain Pine Lodge, but in many ways, it was even more rewarding. I no longer felt the need to chase after approval or validation. I had finally learned that my worth wasn't tied to family legacies or their idea of who I should be. The last time I spoke to my parents was a few years ago. They called, offering me an opportunity to come back to the hotel, to be a part of things again now that Ryan had matured. But by then I had made my peace. I knew that going back would only reopen old wounds. I told them politely that I had moved on and was building my own future. I didn't need their approval anymore. And as difficult as it was to turn down the offer, I knew it was the right choice. Ryan, for his part, seemed to be stuck in a cycle of mismanagement, unable to turn things around. The Mountain Pine Lodge never reached the heights I had once hoped for, and eventually, the family decided to sell it. But I wasn't bitter about that, either. It was just another chapter closing, one I was no longer tied to. In the end, I realized something important. The betrayal, though painful, was a gift in disguise. It forced me to confront my own identity, to take control of my life in ways I hadn't imagined. I stopped measuring my success by what others thought of me and started measuring it by the person I was becoming. I had the power to choose my path, and I was no longer willing to live for someone else's expectations. My journey, though marked by loss and hurt, had ultimately led me to a place of freedom, independence, and self-respect. And as I look back on everything, the hotel, the family, the dreams I once held so tightly, I realize that sometimes letting go is the only way forward. The Mountain Pine Lodge may have been my past, but it no longer defined me. I had my own future build, and nothing, not even betrayal, could take that away from me.